Christopher Hitchens is dead. I want to make this video, and I don't want to keep having to refer to him as Christopher Hitchens, but it's actually kind of difficult to try to think of what to call him. I don't want to keep calling him Hitchens because that sounds so impersonal, and it's weird to think of a guy who I never met, never knew, and never expected to know in such personal terms. But I don't want to refer to him impersonally, and so I don't want to call him Hitchens. And yet I know that he wasn't a friend of mine, and his friends called him Hitch, and I don't feel like that's really appropriate either. I don't feel like I have any right to call him Hitch. He wasn't actually a friend of mine. So I guess for this video I'll take the only option left to me and call him Christopher. And it's a peculiar thing about his writing and his career as a speaker and a filmmaker and a commentator, that he had the quality of allowing you to feel as though you did know him, but without ever pandering. He was the least pandering person, the least pandering public figure I've probably ever been aware of in my life. He was someone who went on Real Time with Bill Maher once and baited the audience to hate him. Oh, I mean, gave the audience the finger, literally. And yet, he was also someone who could be so effortlessly charming, who could just slay you with his charm. But again, without appearing to give a fuck about what you thought at all. It was this wonderful quality he had about him, and a really great wry, droll sophistication about him. It was that, and it was also knowing that his argument was so well reasoned and so well thought out that even if you totally disagreed with him, and there were a few times in his writings and his appearances where I just completely disagreed with him, where I thought he was just dead wrong. I mean, I know he continued to support the war in Iraq from beginning to end. I mean, he was a staunch supporter of the war in Iraq, and a lot of people disagreed with him on that. A lot of people who agree with him on everything else disagreed with him on that. And he didn't care, because he believed that he was right. He knew that he was right, and he could prove it. He could argue it, and argue it forcefully and unapologetically. And you had to respect that. And more than that, you had to like it. It wasn't just that you respected him grudgingly. If he said something that you disagreed with, you were just going, oh, that Hitchens, you know, you have to give that one to him. It wasn't like that at all. You would listen to him with admiration and with genuine affection when he would be telling you things that you just thought were completely wrong, because it was so erudite and it was so charming and so witty. And that's a very rare quality. I can't think off the top of my head of anyone else, any other public figure who has that quality of being able to basically spit in your face and yet have you appreciating it. Obviously, he had just an incredible career as a writer, as a journalist, as a foreign correspondent, as he described himself. And in the last 6 or 7 years or so, as really the foremost, the most prominent voice of what's called New Atheism, and it's from that work that he truly became very, very important and precious to me. And I think he would be pleased with being compared to Thomas Paine, and that's where I think I have to put him in my own personal life. I mean, when I first read Thomas Paine's The Age of Reason in my mid-20s, that was the first time that I really felt like I had a leg to stand on in not being a Christian. Like there were thoughts that I had. I mean, I no longer considered myself a Christian. I hadn't considered myself a Christian since early in high school, but reading Paine was the first time that I felt really emboldened and proud and confident about not being a Christian. And it was the same thing reading Hitchens and feeling that way about being an atheist. Like I felt like when I read Hitchens, I felt like I could finally let that lingering vestige of belief in God, that sort of deism that I was clinging to, I could finally just let that go and say, you know what, I don't need this. I'm strong enough to stand on my own without that. And it was reading God is Not Great and Hitchens' other work, and watching him in debates and watching him give speeches about atheism that really gave that to me. Maybe most importantly, the man was just a genius writer. I mean, if you want to be a writer, if you care about writing and you're trying to improve your craft, as any writer should, you need to read Christopher Hitchens. You need to read everything the man ever wrote. It doesn't matter whether you are writing fiction or nonfiction, whether you are writing about politics or whether you could not give a fuck less about politics. You should read Christopher Hitchens, because no matter what you're writing or what you're writing about, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, whether you're telling stories about things that actually happened or you're inventing them straight from your imagination, the one thing that every writer needs is the ability to be clear and lucid. If you don't have clarity and you don't have lucidity in expressing yourself, you are doomed to fail as a writer. And that lucidity and that clarity are what Hitchens brought to every single sentence I've ever read from the man. And yet it was that clarity combined with that erudition, with that sophistication. He was able to write in a way that communicated not only his idea, but his intelligence. Very often when reading Hitchens, especially when he's writing about international politics, I would feel just completely out of my depth. I would be like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? I don't know any of this. And very often I would follow it up. I would look things up and try to figure out what he's talking about and learn, research the issues he's addressing and the events he's referring to and the people he's quoting and things like that. And Hitchens himself in Hitch 22, his memoir, says that's one of the ways that he got so fucking smart, is that he would read other people, and who would do the same thing, who would make references to things as though they assumed that the reader would know what they were talking about. And as a young man, and presumably throughout his life, occasionally Hitchens would have the experience of reading that and go, I don't know what that guy's talking about. And then he would look it up and he would find it out. And that's something that he and I share, that curiosity and that need to find things out. And when you're made aware of your own ignorance, to want to correct that condition as quickly and as definitively and conclusively as possible. And he wrote so beautifully and so unsparingly about things, and so unapologetically, so confidently. And confidence is another important thing that a writer must have. Confidence in your own abilities as a storyteller, and in your story that you are telling. And Hitchens had that in everything that I've ever read that he wrote. He talked about death. He talked about it in some of the best writing he ever did for Vanity Fair after his diagnosis last year. But he also talked about it in the introduction to his memoir, which, if you haven't read, do yourself a favor. I mean, buy a copy of it, get a copy from the library. You do what I did, actually. Get yourself a real treat and get the audiobook, which Hitchens reads himself. You listen to Hitchens read his own life story to you. Make yourself a gift of it for Christmas if you haven't read it or you don't have it. I cannot possibly urge you more vociferously to read a book than Hitch 22. In Hitch 22 and elsewhere, he talks about he reflects on the ultimate end of his life, on the inevitability of his death. And this was before, the Hitch 22 stuff was written before he had any knowledge of his cancer, before he knew how short the rest of his life would be. He talked about life as a party. And, Hitchens attended many parties. He was a legendary partier. Apparently his friends, one of the word games that he and his friends used to play was they would try to imagine the sentence least likely to be spoken by a particular member of their group. And the sentence they decided was least likely to be spoken by Christopher Hitchens was, "I'm sorry, sir, I don't care how wealthy you are, I'm not coming to your party." So that tells you something about Christopher and his and he was a legendary drinker and a legendary smoker. And he was unrepentant after his cancer diagnosis. He said, although in his, I think it was his first interview after he began chemotherapy, he did advise, if you can lay off the booze and the smokes, you would be very smart to do so. But he also said that he did not regret his own drinking and his own smoking. He said that he could not have imagined having his life without those parties and without that second bottle. And there's something really lovely about that. That even though he can tell other people, maybe you should be a bit smarter about these things than I was, he doesn't look back regretfully or ruefully on the choices he made, because he sees that his life as he lived it would not have been the same without those choices, even with the terrible consequence that they brought. But he talks about life as a party, and he says the worst part is knowing not that you have to leave the party, but that the party will go on without you. And that's where we're at now. He has left the party, and the party must go on without him. And it will not be nearly as fun a party without Christopher, but we will have to carry on without him. There's a photo that someone posted on Facebook last night, right after I learned of his death. Someone posted a picture of Christopher, and it was it had the caption, "Thanks Hitch, we'll take it from here." And I find that I really love that sentiment, that the rest of us are left to carry on without him. One of the people who wrote to Andrew Sullivan to express their condolences, because Andrew Sullivan was actually a close friend of Christopher Hitchens, and is taking his death rather hard, as you would imagine you would take the death of a treasured friend. And this writer wrote in to say that with the death of Christopher Hitchens, the world has been left in the care of us lightweights, but we'll have to do the best we can. And that's really all we can do. I mean, the show must go on. The party continues, even with its most interesting guest having permanently retired. That's the place where we're at, and all I can say is that the impulse, especially now in the immediate aftermath, the impulse is to dwell on how very poorer we are without him. And that was the first thing I said. That was the first thing I wrote on Facebook to people when I learned that he was dead. I said, we are immeasurably poorer for his loss. But now I find that what I would rather focus on is the opposite of that. Yes, we are so much poorer for having lost him, but yet we were and are and always will be so much the richer for having had him. And that's the thought I want to dwell on. That's the thought I would encourage you guys to dwell on. Hitch is gone, and we are so diminished without him, but we are so fortunate and so very much improved for having had him here with us at all.